I know we have plenty of time allotted, but don't want to waste any of it.
Two donut event.
And so, good morning. Call this special meeting of the governing body to order to discuss the ARPA funding. If we could, I'd like to start off with a roll call of those present for the meeting. Brenda, would you call?
Mayor Padilla.
Here.
Councilmembers Hiller.
Here.
Valdivia Acala.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
Here.
Kell.
Here.
Nager.
Here.
Dobler.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
We have 10 present.
Thank you.
Here somewhere.
I'm glad you can join us, Mike. I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the non-action item, if the clerk would read.
The first item is an overview of ARPA funding allocations for the state of Kansas and Shawnee County and how those funds are being spent.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, at the governing body meeting last week, I did, before that, distribute to the council members dollars that are being allocated by the state of Kansas as well as by the federal government, the ARPA spending. And one of the questions is how the county is spending their dollars. And so provided you a quick overview on some of the things that the county is looking at spending dollars on. And then the overall was, what's the state spending their dollars on? And so provided you a list of, and the thing to keep in mind with the state dollars, it's not just specific ARPA dollars. What they do is they lump into all the dollars that they've received. And I think the state of Kansas overall receives $5.8 billion. So these are running things as well as past things that have been brought together. And so the way that the state breaks down theirs is 1.0 billion local recovery funds, 1.6 billion state fiscal recovery funds, 143 million for capital project funds, and 2.3 billion for state agency project funds. And so, as I provided you a list, like I said, it breaks down social service areas as well as community living, health care, food and nutrition, economic development, and housing assistance. And then there's a section for veterans as well as then transportation. But there's a lot of dollars there that the state is allocating in different ways. So the state of Kansas, there are nine entitled cities, which Topeka is one of those, which means we receive a direct deposit from the U.S. Treasury, and that's our $46 million that we're basically discussing. And so that's kind of how that works. There was conversation yesterday afternoon about $764 million or something like that that's out there, and those are funds that can be applied for. There are requirements. There is a 3-page checklist that you have to go through and how those dollars can be spent, what they can be spent on. But those are, it was brought to our attention that, hey, are we applying for those? Yes, we are applying for some of them. And from conversation last night, the anticipation is we'll apply for more. And so we do have a grant writer on staff that that information was sent to us well yesterday. So we'll be applying for those resources.
If you could, with regards to the dollars you're talking about, where we're going to be adding additional applications, are those are the Spark funds?
Well, it's on the Spark funds, and then, when you get into those applications and stuff, there's also other dollars that are tied into it. So that's what I'm saying. The state's kind of rolled theirs together in the aspect of when they say Spark funds, it's encompassing. Mm-hmm. So.
I know that you shared the information with the body. For the benefit of the public, can you give us an idea of what areas that we're already applying for? Because I know that you've already initiated some applications.
Yeah, where we really qualify as a municipality is in the area of water and sewer and broadband infrastructure. And so those are the areas in which we are looking at dollars. Specific projects within the community that have been identified through different conversations. So those are, we will be applying for some water sewer lines in High Crest area. Broadband will be applying for additional devices through the Topeka Shawnee County Broadband initiative that we have going. Monique Glade has requested funds for additional devices and support, and so those would fall under one of those applications. So,
You indicated that there has been some inquiry by the governing body and discussions about additional applications. Are you at a point right now where you can share what those additional applications might include?
well, the additional applications would be more for specific projects of infrastructure that we'd be looking at. So, lead pipe removal. We have water meters that are still lead water meters, so they still have lead going from the meter being lead as well as up to the house. And so those would be projects that would be funding. So utilities has identified how many households that we still have lead meters and lead pipes up to the houses, and so those would be the priority list.
Okay. Any questions for the city manager about what he's just given us information on?
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councilwoman Nager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Manager. My question is just to go ahead and, this is very, very broad, but I'm trying to make sure that I understand this correctly. We would be able to go ahead, if we're not going to, we have our chunk of ARPA funds that we can decide pretty much what we want to do with as long as it falls under that bigger umbrella. However, we might be able to go ahead and say, maximize those dollars for a bigger, more flexible use. If we can go ahead and then apply for additional ARPA funds at different levels of government for some of the infrastructure that you were talking about with the lead pipes, utilities, and broadband. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. We have our dollars, and so one of the things that I try to caution us is that we have our dollars, and there is the possibility of additional funds available. So when we do our planning, me personally, I do not want us to put our eggs in a basket that, hey, we're going to get additional funding, so let's not plan wisely with the $46 million that we have.
Yes.
The thing that's important to remember is we have a couple years to spend the money. So whatever decision is made, today, Tuesday, whatever, of how much, whatever dollars are allocated for specific functions, we can still apply for those additional funds. If we get them, then we can reallocate dollars that we had previously said we're going to spend on this or that. So, there is a very good chance there's additional dollars out there, but there's no guarantee. So we need to plan. Personally, I think we need to plan in a way that we utilize our dollars wisely, and then if we get additional funding, then those dollars can be shifted. The infrastructure bill is a primary example. When you really look at the infrastructure bill, the dollars that possibly might be filtered down to the city of Topeka are going to be very limited, and it's really going to be focused again on lead pipe. And so if we're looking at 3 or 4 different ways to fund lead pipe replacement and meter replacement, that's great. We're probably going to get some of those additional funds, but we just don't know for sure.
So with this being a multi-year, us having that flexibility to spend it over years, would you suggest that, especially with community members who are coming to us and wanting some funds, is that something that you could see happening over the next 2 years, that we could spread out those applications and say, this is the first round? Hey, now that we've gotten through with grants and we know more about the money that we might be getting from other sources, now we can do a second round. Is that something you would suggest at this point? Mostly
on the social service side, a lot of those dollars are applied directly to the state. childcare and things of that nature. The entities have the ability or have the process and should be applying directly to the state for those funds, and not so much through us. When we talk about project avenues and things like that, those are things that we need to go ahead and plan on. And I don't think we should draw out over a year or two if we're wanting to solicit ideas from community members as to how to spend the money on the social service side of things. I think that's a process we need to probably go ahead and get started and look at, and then, make an assessment of what the need of our community is.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions at this point, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. So when should that process begin that you're talking about right now, Bill?
The social service process, that is our topic conversation today. We hope to, one of the things that's coming out here is have guidance and direction on how we want to proceed with that.
Well, are you saying that dialogue is going to happen today, or that the amount, we're going to talk about the amount today, or both?
Well, my
Because
hope and anticipation is a little bit of both.
Yeah, okay. So, in the grant applications that are being put out right now, so with the Spark information, there's 4 advisory panels focused on 4 main topics: health and education, economic revitalization, connectivity, and efficiency and modernization. So you gave out a lot of information in the email that you sent about the state. I can't find it. So what we're looking at more, you said, is water, sewer, and broadband is what y'all are applying for. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's part of the primary focus, because the first one is public emergency and healthcare. We really don't fit into that. And then essential worker response, performing essential worker during the COVID-19 pandemic era, and those are dollars for personnel and stuff, and those conversations have been had somewhat. And then the reduction of services and revenues by the entity, which leads us to the fourth one, which is the water, sewer, and broadband.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, everything that you're applying for is like infrastructure, like concrete infrastructure, pipes, lead pipes, all of that kind of stuff is what y'all are applying for.
Yes, ma'am, that's the primary focus.
And are we then just assuming that not all, but a large part of these social service agencies that are kind of, not knowing what to do, is basically the thought that they need to apply through the state? Is that what we're trying to tell them? Because I'm not going to tell them that, but I just wanted to know, as the city.
Well, that is the way it primarily works, because the city is not going to be set up to be able to distribute funds to support the needs at like a daycare, or opening a new daycare, or funding a daycare, behavioral health services. Once again, there's a lot of dollars that they need to be applying for directly for, as opposed through the city of Topeka funding that. As I did say, through the opioid dollars, we will have about $1.4 million that we can use towards behavioral health services. But on the big spectrum, those entities that would be applying for behavioral health services should already be in the process of working through receiving the state dollars.
So are you still of the mindset, as you were at the last meeting, about 35 million should go to concrete infrastructure?
Well, my recommendation of $35 million is, again, when one of the things that we have been tasked with at staff level is to reduce debt and future borrowing. And so, again, those additional dollars may be coming, but I do not want to plan on the future based upon dollars that we don't have. I would like to proceed forward with dollars that I know we do have, and then if we get the additional funding, we can shift those dollars to other areas. But for me, what I think for the city of Topeka is that staff needs to have a firm kind of set amount of dollars that we know that we're operating with and move forward. And then if we receive the additional fundings, then we can shift those dollars to wherever we want to shift them to.
Okay, I guess I'm confused on that because shift the money, if we get some of these grants in that are specifically going to be based on infrastructure, how would we be able to shift them other places? I'm not understanding.
Well, they can be shifted to additional capital projects that we got planned. So if we have 35 million and say we get another $10 million for lead pipe removal or whatever, the monies that we had set aside or allocated out of that 35 million for lead pipe could then be moved to another project or moved to where social service areas if we want to do that.
Councilman Duncan.
So explain to me why you folks think we have to allocate these funds into our budget beginning in 23 as opposed to 24?
Well, primarily,
making that the starting time.
primarily is we're getting ready to start our CIP planning cycle.
Right.
And so when we talk about bonding money and planning to borrow money for the future, if we build it into the process now, we go, okay, we're not going to have to borrow $35 million. And we can pay cash for those projects. So that's why we're kind of looking for that, because if say, for example, you don't put it into this current planning cycle and we wait till next year, the dollars have to be spent by a certain time. And if we want to use those on projects, some of those projects won't
They
be
have to
close.
be contracted by a certain time. They don't have to be actually paid. That's an important distinction, I think. Is
Right. What they say is that the anticipation is those dollars can be carried over, but there is still a deadline as to when those projects have to be completed. And the extension, I think, is through 26 on a project.
So here's where I get a little stuck now to some degree, and it's looking at timelines. Spark has sort of told us deadlines next week. We're going to, if you'll watch their meetings, their goal is to have those funds allocated by April. That's kind of the time, which is why they want this stuff now. The infrastructure money, we haven't quite seen a process. I don't know if we've been in any contact or heard any feedback yet, but they haven't. But I think the talk now is they're hoping as the legislature gets towards May, they'll have their process in place, and then hopefully by July, August, if not sooner, applications will be in, and they'll have that money allocated before the end of the year. So where I'm struggling is I understand we have our process of CIP talks start soon. We start our budgeting process. We want to allocate these funds. But I'm trying to figure out how in this timeline, feels like we should be applying for a lot of Spark dollars, seeing at what we get through, because we're going to know that by April. And then we're going to know by then a little bit better process of what's coming or what the infrastructure process is and maybe what we can apply for there. And then looking at the Spark stuff, there's quite a bit a municipality can apply for. Broadband, devices and equipment, digital literacy, supporting tools, modernization of state government facilities, equipment upgrades for state government services, investments in IT infrastructure, investments in cyber and physical security of state assets, investments in continuity of operations for state government agencies. We've got everything on that list. We have a wish list for something in those departments that would qualify. We're not going to get all that. I understand that. But that's a long list of things from Spark that we as a municipality qualify for. And I hear what you're saying on the infrastructure bill with replacing lead pipes, but that list is a lot longer. It applies to road projects. I just watched the mayor of Kansas City talk about how their goal is to apply for dollars for, we don't need to do this, but solar for their airports and broadband. Again, we know, and I know we can't rely on that money. We may ask for $100 million and get $2, right? And I know we have to be aware of that. But I would say it seems like we can apply for more than just lead pipes in that process. And I hope that we're going to look at that list and say, let's be, so yes, where I've struggled with now is looking at these timelines and understanding our need to fit it within our process, but also wondering if there's any give here to see what other dollars we can get within that process as we move along before we just simply say, we've already made our determinations, too late, we've moved on, and we'll use those money out. So I'm just letting everyone know that's where that's not where this is all going around in my brain. So
no, and I think you hit it on the head. I think that the issue that we need to decide is not what everything we're going to apply for. This conversation is about the $46 million that we have. And if you look at those other municipalities like Kansas City and Wyandotte County and all that, they're already spent their ARPA dollars, and they're already spending their ARPA dollars. Johnson County and Sedgwick County, they got an additional $79 million up front. They're already rolling on with their ARPA dollar process. They're spending their dollars. They're applying for lots of other stuff, but they're already allocating. So the question, this is really a multiple facet conversation we're having. Are we going to talk about ARPA dollars and how we're going to move forward with that? Are we talking about applying for additional dollars? Are we talking about let's not do anything with the ARPA dollars until we figure out if we're going to get additional dollars or what? So again, this is why we're having this meeting, I guess, is we need direction on what the council desires staff to do. Do you want us to come up with a plan for the $46 million and entertain stuff as we move forward, or hold off completely on doing anything with the $46 million until we figure out whether we're going to get additional dollars?
Deputy Mayor?
I just want one more. I agree with you for most of that. I will say, when we had this workshop a month ago, we left here with a plan. And then, with respect, staff came back, and before we were about to vote on that plan, said, wait a minute, here's another plan. So part of it is I think we're now trying to figure out, okay, we thought we had $35 million, we were going to put forward, and then we got a new plan that said, actually, we'd like 40. And that's great. I need to keep looking at plans, and I agree with you. We've got to make some determinations on what these pots are. But yeah, I think you're right. We've got to start making some determinations.
Well, with all due respect, Councilman, that's not the case. We came out here with a plan, staff had a plan, and that was set outside by additional conversation from council members. We also had a resolution that was ready to go for vote. So I appreciate your comments, but with all due respect, staff did not change that plan.
Better communicate that.
Councilwoman Valdivia-Acala, and then Mr. Wade, did you have something after?
Mayor, there's folks down at this end of the table.
Okay, can't see that far.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just say that I sent an email thinking that I didn't buy into this 35 million. That was clear at this meeting, and I didn't think that there was any vote on that. And so all of a sudden we see a resolution, and I'm like, why are we doing this so quickly? And then Spencer chimed in, and then we took it off the table with blanks on it. So I know that other colleagues need to talk, but this is the deal, is that we had so many social service organizations saying what the need is. We have a desperate need in the chronic, unsheltered homeless that TRM is not going to be able to help with. We need a plan for that, and I would suggest that we use some of the dollars towards that so we can really start selling Topeka in a more honest way and transparent way, because we got problems. And I would also say that I understand about the not wanting to incur more debt, but my way of looking at it is splitting it, because that is the fairest way in my way of looking at it, with the social service agencies and the need that is coming from there. We may not be able to give to every bucket that we come up with, but I think we need to be creative in how we think about this. Thank you.
Down this side of the table, way down there. Somebody before Mr. Wade, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to sit here all morning talking about things we have no clue as to whether we're going to achieve or not. We've got 45 million. A month ago, we talked about 2 buckets. The money we're going to spend to reduce debt, to reduce future debt. I want to talk about that to start with. Then we can decide how much of that's going to go towards social services. We can set up a program if necessary, and then we can get out of here. Mr. Wade, talk to us a little bit about the difference between using these funds for utilities versus Geo Debt Reduction or general fund.
Put me in the queue.
So at last session, Councilman Emerson asked us to take a look at the impact of using this money and what it would do for utility rates. And so at the last council meeting, that's part of what we were trying to talk about is the impact to utility rates by using ARPA dollars is minimal. Whereas if you if this body decides to put the money, and that's where the $40 million came from, was if you put it towards the debt service on the Geo side, that's where it would allow you to, we believe, based on early projections, we believe it would allow you to hold your mill levy flat through 27. And so what we were trying to do, based on the request that came, Councilman, where we could maximize the impact on a household level, it's my understanding that there is not a large appetite to both raise utility rates and mill levy in the same year. And so we were trying to maximize the impact. That $40 million is really that level that allows us to freeze, we believe will allow us to freeze the mill levy. That said and done, inflation numbers are high right now. Numbers that came out this week, they're at a 40-year high. And so depending on what happens over a period of time with inflation, that can affect, of course, the mill levy. But that's I hope that answers your question.
That did. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to kind of put into this mix, I guess I feel like we can't just talk about this little ARPA bucket all by itself, and I have felt that way all along, but in a good way, not in a bad way, in that we have had a list that has grown over time with all kinds of ideas or requests for money because we had some, because it was money we never had, so it makes sense for anybody to write in and say, hey, could you fund this or could you fund that, and at least get on our list. But something that I've wanted all along that is percolating, for instance, with this report that City Manager gave this morning is if there is money from someplace else, I want it all. I want to get our utilities done, but I want to help those social services and the folks in need as well. But if there is a ton of child care money coming down through folks who always fund it and know how to prioritize it and give it out, and all of our people are eligible to go after the child care money, then to me, if there's something we can do to advocate for it, for instance, putting in my understanding is that what's due to Spark is not so much exactly funding applications, but recommendations to the state on how they should spend the money. And if that is the case, then we can say, we've got this much need in childcare, and if Reva Wattis is writing the application and we say we think you need to give them at least that much or less or more or whatever we want to say, then to me we can, and I'm just using that as an example, check that box. If we can get any money from other sources, if we can identify it and help our community access money from every single source that's out there, then I think we should do that. And so not just to focus on our formula allocation, but because the same thing appears to be true. I mean, if we've got opioid money coming in that can help with the homeless population and people with substance abuse and mental health needs, then okay, how does whatever it is, 1.4 million plus there's money from the state for that, and the state normally gives out that money, and they know how to review those applications and prioritize and see if people are working together rather than us taking on something we don't normally do to try and make good decisions. And so on and so on. I think we need to be looking at all those needs and then all those different sources. For me, that ties back to what staff has proposed, that if we want to choose to spend most of ours on what's already in the CIP and not borrow that money and trade it out if it turns out we get an infrastructure grant for some of it, but nonetheless focus that on doing what we do and managing what we know we can manage. I like the idea of strategic investments that are going to have long-term benefits. That's the same thing the state has said, which, was nice to see that same sort of language. But if we think projects are important, then I don't have a problem. I think we owe it to our community and to the city to be looking at everything and figuring out if we can help it get support somewhere. Also, don't want us to think too small. Back to broadband, for instance, if there's money elsewhere for broadband, then I think we should go elsewhere for broadband as well, at least core. If there's, even so though, that with Spark, apparently we could get broadband done. I don't want to go after a small number of devices for people when what we've talked about, and I chair the Public Health and Safety Committee, Councilman Dobler got that issue on our table. We have a testimony from Scott Gowan, for instance. It's not very specific, but I will tell you that what we got to in the committee about broadband was that it looks like rates are going to get worked out, so there are appropriate rate schedules for low-income people. The school districts are working with kids, but what we've got all over the place is people who don't know how to set up their equipment. They might need a different router and things like that. The city stepped out and got a grant for getting what they call navigators. One is a half-time outreach person and one is a half-time tech person. But the conversation has been, boy, what we need to help everybody is to have somebody who can go help them. And so I threw something together last night when things were going around, and I don't know that that's final, but what I've heard is if what we really need to close that gap and get everybody hooked up is not hardware, not infrastructure, but is helping people get hooked up in their homes, then instead of just asking for, I don't know, $50,000 worth of laptops or something, if what we need to ask for is a couple $1 million, so we've got, if those grants last for 3 years, so that we've got a team of 4 to 6 full-time people, and then enough money to go with that to get routers. I mean, big money, and give a run at it. That's very innovative, but we've peeled that onion enough that we know that that's where, to actually get the rubber to hit the road, that's what we need for broadband inside the city of Topeka. We don't necessarily even have to be the requester or the host for that. And so just using that one as an example, okay, if there's that need, who's the best lead on it? Who should the applicant be? Let's go for it. Let's make sure we collectively go after big money. You get more points according to the state if you've got partners, if you've thought it through and you know who those partners are. That's just another example. But I think we need to be, with all these monies and all these different pots and some of them specific and some not, yes, focus on what we want to do with our own ARPA money, but in the context of the whole big picture. Thank you.
Councilman Kell and then Councilman Dobler.
There's some key words I've heard the last couple meetings that we need to, I think, kind of look at, and that's deferred maintenance and debt reduction, which are debt reduction is a big deal for me, but it's almost, I'm almost looking at some of these, we need to look at some of our deferred maintenance projects, because every single time we defer a project, that project costs more down the road. And it gets worse, the cost of materials get higher, the cost of labor get higher, and we get, as a city, we get on landlords for not taking care of their properties. And if a landlord were to come across the money we'd heard about and not take care of their properties, we would hammer that landlord for that. Well, the city is the landlord of the police station, of the firehouses, of the city office buildings, of the maintenance sheds. And we have a lot of issues at those places that we need to look at also that have been deferred year after year after year. So I don't think one thing we keep on almost talking about is two buckets, social services and ARPA as left over as a whole. I think we need to look at several different buckets. And that's the reason I've asked a couple times for a priority list from all the departments so we can know what the need of the city is, because we keep on deferring maintenance on certain places, like a firehouse has a leaky roof. Well, what's going to cost to replace that whole entire building in 5 years if we don't fix that roof? What's it cost when HVAC doesn't work in the building and it's blowing out heat in the summer? These are our employees. We're required to take care of our employees. There's a place that they live in, And if this is a landlord, we would be hammering them as a city council. So we need to look at those projects such as those that we need to look at, and maybe even have a third, fourth, fifth bucket. So we are taking care of our needs, not deferring it, but also looking at the debt reduction also, because if we keep on deferring projects, the long run, they're just going to keep on costing us more and more, or overall replacement costs.
Thank you. Before we move on to Councilman Dobler, Councilman Kell, I don't like to characterize us as a body or in any department as hammering people in our community. Now, we enforce the codes and we try to work with them as much as we can, but we are not hammering people. It's a term that I feel that gives the wrong impression about what our approach is and what we're trying to accomplish with code enforcement. So I take exception to the word of hammering. Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a couple of questions, probably for staff in this this go around. So I agree with Councilwoman Hiller. There's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of funds. It'd be great if we knew what we were going to get out of all those. We don't. We're not going to know for a while, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, who knows. We could set on this money till we know, but that's probably not a wise thing to do. So we're going to have to enter the gray area and try to anticipate what we might get. So Councilman Kell talked about deferred maintenance, and he's absolutely right in terms of buildings and things like that that the city owns. I'm assuming that deferred maintenance is addressed in the CIP that we currently have. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yes.
sir.
Thank you. So if we simply stick with the two buckets, one is the city bucket, which addresses the CIP, which in turn addresses deferred maintenance, and the other is the social services bucket. If the city bucket is intended to fund the CIP to reduce the need for future property tax increase, you've stated that 40 million would take us to 2027.
Yes, sir.
Rough guess on where 35 million might take us? I know that's a tough question. Let's assume it takes us to 2026. That'll be my guess, so
I
we
think
can't come back to you. But we know there's infrastructure money out there that may possibly make up that $5 million difference, correct? I think we need to find that number, whether it's 35 million, 30 million, 32.5 million, whatever it is, and allow staff to start programming those projects that will save us money in the future from debt service. And then, as Councilman Hiller said, whatever we need to do to help our community get those funds outside the city, go after infrastructure funds ourselves to replace that. And that would do two things. It would either fill that gap between the 40 million and whatever number we come up with, or it would allow us to pump more of that money into social services down the road, because we're not going to spend it all in the next year or so. So I would suggest that we figure out where the comfort zone is, 35 million, 30, and get that moving with the knowledge that we're going to be able to add to that in the future. Now, the key to that is we don't go after projects that aren't in the CIP. So we don't say, hey, there's a program out there, and we've always wanted a new city building over here, so we're going to go after those funds to build a new city building. We can't do that. We have to focus on the CIP, assume that's correct, and do what we can to fund that CIP with free dollars. So, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of that in the sense that I agree with Councilmember Dobler. So let me be clear where I'm at, where my comfort zone is, so that everyone knows. My position is, and this is just in listening to what we heard on Tuesday, feedback I've gotten from the community, and I've gone back and forth on this one. I think a lot of us have in terms of what's the right magic number. And I think I mentioned to staff earlier, I said, my comfort level is it's going to be hard for me to support a plan that doesn't put a minimum, my floor, of $10 million into that community bucket. That's sort of my comfort zone in terms of where I'm comfortable starting, and then whatever that leaves. If we want to go a little more, great. I'm not comfortable going less, and then decide what that zone is. But so I'll just put that out there now. That's kind of where I'm at. As long as that community bucket starts at that 10 million number, we can go from there. For my yes vote, as that would be, sir, how it goes. So
I would support that, certainly.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Could I ask a question, sort of a challenge question, I guess, but if in fact it turns out that the things that you sort of had in mind or that we had on our accumulated list that might be eligible for that 10 million that you're envisioning, if it turns out that there's funding for those things elsewhere, why wouldn't we go after that?
So two things.
We could back it up, but why wouldn't we go after it?
Two things. I don't think we can't allocate those funds today. We've already discussed that community bucket process is going to take a little time. I mean, there's have to be an application, discussion at the council level about what those qualifications are. So that's not going to happen in the next 30 days. That's probably several months before we're even accepting applications. So we're going to know Spark money in a couple months for the most part and who got what. We're going to have a better idea by that time of what the infrastructure, which won't affect the community pot, but some of that's going to shake out, I think, on that process. So I don't see that we can't say, we know we want X amount of dollars in that bucket, but we know it's going to be a few months, but at least we've made those designations and can move forward. And then as those things come up, I think part of that application process can be, have you received other funds? And so that gives us a base to say, oh, well, they got $5 million here. We still want to give them money, or they got $100,000, and factor that into our decision. So I do think we can do these two things simultaneously without holding back the whole process, because we're not doing it right away.
Well, and thank you for that. I guess that's one reason why when we were moving our way toward a preliminary resolution before, my thought was it should say at least X, whatever that figure was, because if it turns out that other things were covered, to me, infrastructure and debt, as you described it, deferred maintenance / infrastructure and debt reduction are a top priority for us as a city. And if we can set that goal, set it big, set it solid, and stay with it, it will have paybacks, savings and paybacks for a long, long time. And then when we go after infrastructure, for instance, if we put what we already have in the CIP today that has been vetted and considered as priority, then maybe we go after lead pipes, for instance, when the infrastructure grants come through, because they're extra and they could be on top of that. But if that 40 million is critical for us, and $5.5 million is still a lot to consider for other uses. Now, one more thing, and then I'll back up. For instance, the proposed, what the city had told us or staff had said that they were proposing already to recommend to Spark was the development at Highcrest, the infrastructure installation for Fremont Hill. That's on our bucket list too. We have more than social services, I guess, on that other bucket that we've accumulated. And so, again, we could push-pull with, I hope we would set a little higher level, but then stick with it so we know for sure we're doing our city top priority stuff, and then keep working on both. Thank you.
Councilman Emerson, then Councilman Lesser, and then Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you,
and then Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. This week, I think 10-year Treasury went over 2%. And we've been extremely lucky in the city that we've been able to borrow we've had extremely low borrowing cost thanks to an almost zero interest rate. That is going to go up. I'm sure the next bond, we're going to maybe pay another percent. They're talking about the next time the Fed meets, they may do a 0.5 point raise. And we have a huge debt problem in the city. So I am supportive of the two buckets, as Councilman Dobler said, but frankly, if I had my way, I would want the entire $46 million to go to debt reduction. And and by debt reduction, I mean not incurring new debt, because I think it would be smartest. The stuff we have right now is at the ultra low rates. We don't want to refund that, right? What you want to do is pay cash for projects, and therefore get around the 20%, all the issuing fees and everything else that goes into debt. So that said, I know there are a lot of needs in the community as well. So I would be fine somewhere from 35 to 40 million, setting that aside for paying cash for projects, whether it be deferred maintenance projects, whether it be whatever we need to do, and then leave the rest in the community bucket. Now, I totally agree with what Mr. Councilman Duncan said, that especially with the Spark funding, we are not going to know what those people get, assuming people in our community are applying, and I hope they are. We're not going to know till June or something on that. June or
Spark might be as soon as April if they stick to their timeline.
Okay.
Which I think they will.
So obviously, I think
there's elections coming up. They got to get stuff.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. So I think our process should not begin before we know what other people are getting to allocate the rest of the money. But yes, I would be fine somewhere between 30 and 40 million, 35 and 40 million used for avoidance of new debt.
Councilman Lesser?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to I'm not on my A game, as you guys can imagine, but I did want to say I kind of view where we're at right now from 10,000 feet, that we look at these two buckets that we have and come up with a conclusion of where we want and what amount we want to use as a starting base of going into the buckets. I then look at, the easier piece of, for lack of a better term, the social service, bucket is when we go to spend that money, that's not, in my opinion, going to take as much planning from the point of building a road or replacing lead pipe, whatever that would be. That's going to be, we've decided we're going to give XYZ organization money, and we cut a check and we give it to them. So, I mean, it doesn't take the time and the preparation that some of these other projects are going to take. That being the case, the way that I also envision this is when we get to that point where, I agree today is trying to figure out what the 10,000 feet amount of money is for the buckets. And then when we go to the micro, then we go down to the micro analysis of, okay, let's just say for sake of argument, we're giving 10 million to the social service bucket. And then we're going to determine who gets that money. That's when I think the work comes in of saying, doing it. I was on JADO. I sat on I helped create, I was on the task force for the money that we did for the grant for small businesses and giving those individuals money. And that's where I think then we have to do an analysis of, okay, what funds have you already received in regards to help from the government in the previous 2 years? What are you expecting to get from a Spark? What we need to then do an analysis, because then we're able to make sure that we're able to. I don't want to say this because I don't want this to be misconstrued, but we don't need the rich to get richer. You know what I mean? We need to help the ones that were missed, and we need to then help facilitate the people that didn't get any funds because they weren't eligible under any of the other programs, et cetera, et cetera. Personally, mental health, childcare, homeless, those are three issues of mine that I want to do the research. But as much as I support, childcare and home, all those three topics, for instance, I also want to see what they've got in the past already compared to what other organizations that are applying to us as well. So there again, that's a long-winded answer of saying I think step one is deciding at what level we want to fund both of these buckets. The micro level I see coming down long down the road. I don't see any of that as a conversation for today, quite frankly. And then analyzing those, they all have needs, but analyzing what that need is. So again, hopefully my prednisone-induced speech did not go off the rails or anything like that. If it did, I'm sure my phone will light up and people tell me not to talk for the rest of the day, which generally happens anyway. But
Yeah, no more than normal.
Thank you for that. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcalá and Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, Steve, or anybody taking notes better than I am, what are some of the amounts that have been bandied about for going towards utilities, infrastructure, et cetera, that people have said 30 million, 40 million, 35 million? Are those some of the numbers we've just been, people have
We've
been
discussed 30, 35, 40, and all of it.
Okay.
Somebody said 32.5 along the
Yeah,
line.
30, I've missed that.
Yeah.
Come on, give credit.
Okay, and so with that, I think that, if you look at 30 going towards that, that would put about, 15 million in the community bucket? Am I hearing that right?
We have right about 46 million, so.
16. So, I think that would be a really good start. I like that. I could support that. I would feel like I had done my due diligence as a representative with the agencies and hearing what the need is, et cetera. And then the rest of the money for utilities and what have you. That seems like it's as fair as it can be, but I could definitely support that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I too can support that, the 30 mil and the 16 mil. I want to make sure that everybody is okay with the two buckets, right? Because I've heard different things. But I would support the 30 mil with the caveat that if we have extra money, that it goes into the, if we can get any more into the social services bucket, that we do that. Because there's just a lot of needs out there. And we heard just the tip of the iceberg. Small businesses are they're still struggling. They can't get workers in there, so they're cutting their hours. I know another business that's talking about closing up their business. But I think another thing is we have to be mindful as we can be when it comes to the 30 mil, that it touches all areas of the city. And has staff looked at that, Bill? Because what I don't want to happen, and we hear this all the time, and I know people get tired of hearing it, but they took that 30 million and they poured it right on into the other side of town, to the east side or to the west side. We want to make sure that it's evened out. And I don't know how we do that, but we need to make sure that that's evened out. And with the social services, I heard what Lester said, and I heard him say he might be on his meds or whatever. But we also have to be mindful that even though people applied for the federal grant money, they weren't allowed to come back a second time. They were only allowed to come back one time. And so that was even hurtful to them. So we need to distinguish, and I understand that's later down the road. But I just want to make sure that when we look at both of these, that it's even across the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
City Manager?
Yes, Councilwoman Ortiz, everybody got a list of the capital projects, $59 million. And we do have a list that we prioritized. on where projects would be or what ones we would start with. So, I mean, I can share that if you want.
Please.
So, the first priority that we would be is Northwest Tyler Street and Beverly Street to Paramore. The second would be Northwest Tyler Street to Lyman Road in Beverly. Number 3 would be Topeka Boulevard, 29th to 37th. 4 would be the Neighborhood Infrastructure Program, SORT. 5 would be the sidewalk infill plan. 6 would be the Facility Improvements and Maintenance Program, the FIRM program. And then 7 would be the Huntoon Executive Drive to Urish Road, and that pretty much encompassed the 30 to 40 million in the bucket, so.
City Manager?
Councilwoman Ortiz, did that help?
That did. Can you break that down by districts? How much of that is in each district?
Certainly, we can do that.
Because I know that's what my people are going to say. That's what they say now. You know, I've got Southeast 6th Street, Croco to K4. The county's starting on that. And from Golden to Croco, there's no activity. And that's city and it's county. And citizens, they don't look at that. They look at what's being done right in the middle, right in their front yard. And so we want to make sure, and I want it to be fair across the board. We want to make sure that they understand this is what we're doing. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller?
On that subject, I appreciate Councilwoman Ortiz saying we keep hearing that. I do, and we do get tired of it sometimes. I do think if we, you know, our city has certainly had places where we needed to improve, but one of the things for years and years that this city has been pretty consistent about is trying to be geographically disperse both all kinds of infrastructure projects, streets, sidewalks, curb and gutter, SORT, utilities as well. If somebody really wanted to evaluate that, I think it probably should be done on more than just a 4-year schedule, because these big projects, you know, it might look a little unbalanced for those particular 5 big projects. That one is a pretty good list coming up. But you were reading straight out of our CIP. That wasn't something somebody made up just for this. That's what we've done all the time. And so I do think we need to, it's a little off this conversation alone, but to educate the public so that we quit hearing that. I mean, that we always adhere to it, but that people understand. I mean, even back to half-cent sales tax, the very first streets that got done with half-cent sales tax were Adams and California. And then people still complain that we go to the east side. And I just think maybe we need to do a better job of, I think we do monitor it and the staff always follows that, but letting the public know periodically, maybe just evaluating that and publicizing it.
Yeah, you're correct. It is off the CIP list, and even we heard today, not new projects that we are planning to reduce debt. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilman Dobler, then Councilman Emerson.
I'll let Councilman Emerson go first. I think he had his hand up.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilman Dobler. Yeah, and I think we all have the same aim here. We want to help the most people we can with this money. Just in my opinion, though, every single person gets affected by utility rates and debt. Whereas with the social services, not everyone in the city will access those. So to the extent possible, I want to help reducing debt will everybody, whether you rent or anything else. Property taxes affect how much you pay, and utility rates affect what your monthly expenses are. So that's a reason, and again, my absolute floor would be 35 million to go towards that stuff, and frankly, I'd rather have 40 million, because that helps the most number of people, whether you make $1,000 a year, or 10,000 or 100,000, it helps everybody in the city.
Thank you. Councilman?
Thank you, Mayor. By the way, I think out of that list of projects, only one of them was actually west of Topeka Boulevard. So just want to point that out. And, you know, frankly, the constituent, and none of them in District 7, by the way. And that's fine, because what my constituents want is no property tax raise. So let's get this thing done. Question for the city attorney. Can we make motions and vote on direction in this session?
Deputy Mayor asked me that a little bit ago. Yes, I purposely had this noticed as a special meeting because I had a feeling you guys might want to make motions.
Okay, so it appears that we are close to that time when we should decide what bucket A looks like. And I would make a motion that we fund the CIP program for the city of Topeka at $37.5 million.
If I could real quick, 35 million gets us through 2026.
Okay, so 37.5 would get us through June 1 of, yeah, okay.
Well, that leaves some room to get some grants in there too, maybe. We do that.
Neil?
Councilwoman Ortiz, Councilman Neal has a follow-up here.
Yeah, and just, we had the discussion, I think we set that number, but with the understanding that additional funding for infrastructure may in fact reduce that number. Not spending all of the social service money would perhaps raise that number. There's opportunities to go both ways, it looks like. Thank you, Mayor.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Councilman Emerson. For discussion, Councilwoman Ortiz?
Neil, would you amend that to make sure that I don't know, other than in conversations that we said we're going to have this bucket and that bucket. Would you amend that to say we're going to have this bucket and that bucket so we're all in agreement and we all vote on it? I know it's been conversation.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So the motion would be that $37.5 million of the $46 million would go towards the capital improvement program projects that in the current CIP. The remainder of the money would go towards social service programs in the city of Topeka.
Deputy Mayor?
And so, if I may, Mr. Mayor, so I just want to make sure that we're all in agreement on two buckets. I don't want to see another meeting we come by and get another bucket. I guess that's where I'm going with that.
Deputy Mayor?
So could you give us the totals then? What does that mean that the second bucket, because I don't have that right in front of me. So if it's 37.5 into one bucket, what is this amount that it leaves for the second bucket?
Just a little under. It should be just a little under 10.
If it's 46.5.
I don't really know what the real number is that we're going from.
Is it
I know, 'cause
46?
it's got some change on the end. Go figure. They sent us some nickels.
45.6.
Right.
45.6, and the motion was 35.5.
Okay, well, as the guy who just sat here and said I will vote for nothing if it doesn't include $10 million into the community bucket, I will have to vote no on this motion. Thank you.
We know where you stand.
I know, I just want.
Councilwoman Valdivia Acala.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that, there's definitely credence to what Tony said and Neil said about, folks not wanting their property tax raised and wanting to help everybody, et cetera. But I think that we also have to look at it by us investing more of a fair share, which I was hoping we were going to do 16 million, that we would also be making that commitment, because we all know that all of Topeka doesn't benefit directly from social service monies. However, as we lift up Topeka in our communities and the travesties we're having with all of the fires and the squatters and the mental health issues and the petty crime and all of this other, as we work as a city along with our partners to help reduce that as much as possible, then it does make Topeka more attractive to bring in folks, to keep folks here. So by some extension, then that does help everybody. I cannot support, I know it's not meant as an insult, but it's almost like all those social service agencies that came up, and I know that they've got their own ability to go for dollars, and I know there might be some moving around of dollars. I just think it doesn't do a whole lot for the voice of what was tried to be communicated at last Tuesday's meeting, so I won't be supporting. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Yeah, the only two things that I will bring in to add to this, and I don't know if there's a possibility of any reconsideration on the motion, but I am I'm kind of with Spencer. I'd like to see 10 million going into the social service bucket, and there again, I'm talking mental health. I'm talking homelessness. I'm talking all the other topics that I touched on, and there again, I'll reemphasize it of going down to the micro level. And this may be unpopular, to say this, and those of you that know me know I probably really don't care. But when I say and I hear this social service, and I see some of this stuff, and I know this probably will, even Spencer, I'm agreeing with him on this, but when I look into those buckets, I'm not talking about businesses such as like TPAC, and there's other ways that we can fund it. I'm talking about social services for mental health, for homelessness, for childcare, for those type of things. I'm not interested in business development under this round of what we're doing for the arts, for those things like that. And I'm sorry, but I'm just not. This is to help the people who are the most vulnerable, and there's other avenues and other ways that we can help those other organizations. And I know I'm speaking clearly just for myself, but when I've looked at kind of where we're talking, who we got responses from and stuff, and I didn't mean to pick on anybody like that, but I'm just saying I want to be clear that I want to help the most vulnerable with that, not some of those other programs that I do know for a fact have received other funding and have the ability to raise funds other ways. So anyway, that's all I got.
Thank you. Councilwoman Nager, and then City Manager, and then Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the same reasons that have been given before, really a $10 million dollar minimum to the community bucket or pot, just to put another term in there to confuse everybody. That's really the lowest that I feel like I can adhere to, so I cannot support the motion as it currently stands. Thank you.
Thank you. City Manager.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Just to point out real quick, 35 million, no mill levy increase through 26. If we do 30 million, we anticipate a mill levy before that. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that?
What'd you say again?
Can you repeat?
If we go 30 million, we would anticipate a mill levy request increase within the next year or so. Whereas 35 million will get us through 06 with no mill levy.
Councilwoman Ortiz, and then Councilman Emerson.
26.
Oh, okay, thank you. I won't support it either. I would like to see the 10 million in the second bucket. And again, if I really want us to see us vote on bucket A and B. I'm sorry, guys, because there's been so much discussion and nobody's hearing me. Amanda, can you help me out here? Because we haven't voted on that. And I think it's very important that we vote on that.
There is currently a motion on the floor that could be amended at any time.
But it also addresses A and B right now.
Yeah.
I believe the motion from Councilman Dobler has the first 37.5 million to fund the CIP bucket, and then the remainder for the social services, which would be bucket B.
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Emerson and then Councilman Lesser.
And I guess, and I'm sorry to go back to this, but What's the exact amount we're starting with? Is it 45.6?
676-831.
45676-831.
676.
831.
No sense on there?
Okay.
Maybe they rounded up.
Okay. Okay.
It's a roundup, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser?
Yeah, I would like to make a friendly motion, a friendly amendment to Councilman Dobler's motion, if he's willing to amend it to 35 million and 10 million.
Councilman Dobler?
I would be willing to accept that friendly amendment.
And I guess my question is, it's actually a little bit over. Do we want to set aside 10 million for social services? Is that the thought?
And then the remainder.
The remainder then, which would be a little more than 35 million then. And I would still second that, I guess, if that's.
Could I be a friendly, maybe Councilman Lesser would make that his friendly amendment.
I think it would be helpful for the city clerk if somebody restated the motion.
Yes, that's what I was going to do.
What a nice gesture on your part.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Lesser?
can you please ask Mr. Emerson to please address the chair moving forward?
I'll do as much as I can, thank you. Or don't vote for Councilman Dobler's motion and amendment, and then restate a new motion so it's clear where we want to go. Pardon? Yeah.
Motion.
I think we could accomplish both by restating the motion as setting aside 35.676831 for the CIP, which would, and the remaining 10 million .00 would go to social services. So again, 35.676831 to the CIP, 10 million to social services.
And I again would refer my second on that.
Okay. Further comment before we vote? Councilwoman Hiller.
Clarification and a reminder, I've got our list from December. We had pre-committed by vote 1.5 million for premium pay for our public safety staff out of this money. And so I think we probably need to address that before we would think we were finished. The other thing is, and Councilman Lesser talked about it, but if we really mean social services as only those social services, there were a variety of other proposals in here, and if that just everybody means that, that's important to clarify. Everything from whatever it is, TPAC to broadband literacy to JADO stuff. I mean, wherever that line gets drawn in terms of definitions by using the term social services instead of community or whatever, that's narrowing intent.
I think that was the motion, social services. So whatever.
Understood. I just wanted to make sure, we've gotten kind of focused on these two buckets, which is good, but there've been a variety of proposals.
If I may, and then Councilman Lesser. Councilman Kell, did you have your hand up earlier?
Oh, no, I was just going to second
Okay.
the amended motion,
Okay.
but that was.
If I may, a lot has been discussed here, and I think it's very helpful, especially to the public who's trying to follow this too, because we're all in this same room and trying to figure out exactly what numbers there are. And I want to make sure that we do it in a way that is communicated to the public that we've really given a lot of deliberation and consideration to what we're doing here. There are a couple of things that came up during these conversations that I kind of want to address.
Great.
And it was brought up in a sense by Councilwoman Hiller, and maybe in the form of a question to the city manager. When we looked at initiating our work for these ARPA funds, the city as a body, were we able to engage some of these other entities that are going to be receiving money from through their own applications to know what they had planned, to have an idea of where they were going, or if there was some deliberate collaboration between them and the city as we formulated our ideas?
At that time, I'd say no, Mayor, mainly because nobody really knew what the dollars on the horizon were coming. A primary example would be healthcare and behavioral health services. There's a lot of funding that's available and still coming, but at that time, nobody really knew what dollars were out there. And so when we solicited input, we got a lot of input. And when I say social service, I think I agree with Councilman Dobler. Social services are whatever other than infrastructure, basically, and then we can decide what that's going to look like. So at that time, no. Now, one of the things that when we go forward and we go to distribute dollars to local entities that are applying, I think that is one of the things, if we want to ask, have you received any funding, or are you anticipating receiving any funding? Those are questions we come ask. But the three primary question is, how much do you need, what do you spend it on, and how were you impacted by the pandemic, are the main primary questions, I believe that. And then if we want to ask if you've received, they're going to be receiving any funding.
Or if they applied.
Well, it's just an observation. Maybe I'm off base on it, because this is, I don't want to call it a windfall, but I guess it may be in the way of ARPA funds. And I think everyone who could benefit from that got excited about the opportunity that they presented, but maybe got excited in our own buckets, as it were, and then didn't communicate enough with each other about how are we going to proceed and how will it interact with the city's plans, and how can we be more collaborative on that effort. So I understand that. I had people in the community saying, well, that's a big jar of money and everybody's trying to get some of it. And I said, yeah, but there is just a small opening there, and only so many hands can get in there at once. And I think it would have helped for me anyway, to see that we had been deliberate in trying to seek them out rather than waiting for them to come to us. I think that's if that effort has been made, or in the future as we look toward things, is that if we can do that, I feel more confident that we are addressing the voice of the public in at least giving them consideration at the front end.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is when that information was solicited before, that's all we were soliciting input. There's been no follow-up conversation, and it's kind of like the conversation if you want to have about child care. If we're going to allocate dollars for child care, for example, what does that really mean? I mean, does that mean we're going to fund child care providers? It's easy to say, hey, we want to do child care. It's really, how is it going to be distributed? Same with behavioral health services. We want to fund behavioral health services. Okay, well, what does that really mean? I mean, does that mean you're going to give dollars to an existing entity that provides those services? Because we don't provide those services. So those are conversations when we start getting into those type of dollars that we need. So.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Lesser, did you have something?
I did. There again, I just kind of wanted to re-emphasize kind of what I'd said earlier. Right now, we're choosing these two buckets. As we look back, even to where this first conversation started months and months ago, this thing has, hate to use the word, but all the different programs have mutated. They've changed. We weren't even talking about Spark, 3-4 months ago when we were talking about that. And I anticipate that probably, Spencer's more in tune with the State House than I am, clearly. But I anticipate there being some more changes. We're working with the county on some other things that have came about since we first started talking about that. So I envision this as we've done this today. The offense, we've selected what the offense is. The offense is running out onto the field. And now the next step then will be to decide what actual plays we're going to call, and who those players are. So that's kind of the way I look at this. So I know I have the motion. Did I need to accept or do anything on that, Amanda?
You don't actually have the motion. It was Dobler's motion with Emerson second.
Well, I thought I did a substitute motion.
He instead made a friendly, you asked for a friendly amendment, which he accepted, so it goes back and it's still Dobler's motion with Emerson second.
Sorry.
That's it. They always just want to take all the credit for it. That's fine. Go.
I think
Call
they're
the
just
question,
helping you
Mayor.
out while you're sick.
Mayor, I'll call the
Oh,
question.
no. There's no helping out there. Trust me.
We saw it in the state.
Councilwoman Nager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I might have gotten my timing completely wrong. I just wanted to make sure that this was clear enough for Councilwoman Ortiz's request that we were very specific about our buckets. Okay, excellent. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
If I may, I'll speak to the motion that we have before us. I think it's a start. I personally would have liked to had a bit more than the 10 million. And I agree with the minimum that the deputy mayor had expressed, because I do think that there will be opportunities for other monies to come to our infrastructure needs. And this is an opportunity that I think is going to be rare and not probably seen again in any short period of time. But with the motion before us, I would support it as a minimum, but would look to ask us to continue to work as a group, as I have suggested, with those parties that could be affected by social services monies, so that we can better coordinate with them to see where their needs are. I agree that we aren't going to be in a position to start new businesses in healthcare or start new businesses in childcare, but to support those existing businesses who are struggling in that small business arena. So I would support it as it is right now. I would have been fine if we'd gone down to the 30 million. I do want to remind us that some of the council members here have in the past warned us about the future of our financial needs for the city of Topeka, and we can't overlook that. We have to prepare for that. And so being cognizant of that, we can be generous, but maybe over-generous to a fault to where we get ourselves in trouble down the road. I like the idea of making the biggest impact for the total citizenry by being able to keep the levy where it is. And I think, as Mr. Wade said, that it gets us through to 2026, that with the, or is that further with the 35 million proposal?
We believe 2026.
2026. That's helpful. That gives us plenty of time to plan and to work on those needs that will come to us. So as it stands right now, I'll support this with an eye towards continued work in the social services area. And if we can move forward, I think Councilman Dobler called the question. If you could restate for us the motion. Do we vote on the amendment or the friendly amendment?
No, he accepted it on his motion. So you are on the final motion. I'll let Brenda read it because she has the exact words. But just as a legal clarification, this is final action. There's no requirement this be in a resolution. So this would be the last time you would deal with this unless you reconsidered it. So if you don't see resolutions on Tuesday's meeting, that's because you don't legally need one unless you tell me you want one for some reason.
Okay, the motion is, we have a motion by Dobler, a second by Emerson. We're going to allocate $35.6 million to the CIP and the remaining solid $10 million to the social services.
Okay, we've had a motion and a second. Discussion. Brenda, I won't close discussion. He called the question.
What does that mean?
That means we have to move forward with this. Our discussion is closed.
Okay.
Brenda, would you call the roll vote, please?
So start with Councilmember Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Hiller,
Reluctantly, yes.
Valdivia Akla,
No.
Ortiz,
No.
Emerson,
Yes.
Kale,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
and Dobler.
Yes.
Okay, we have 7. Mayor. Sorry.
That's okay, sometimes I leave you out, Brenda, in this whole process. So
Right?
now you got even with, yeah. Yes.
Okay. We have 8 yes, council members Valdivia, Akla, and Ortiz voting no. So the motion carries.
Thank you. I appreciated all the discussion. I think the community that's watching this, and from my last communications from the public when we had our first meeting, there are a lot of people tuning into these discussions, so I think that helps get our message out. We'll move on to the next action item. Brenda, if you'd read.
Okay, the next action item is discussion and possible action on recommendations regarding the application process for the remaining ARPA funds not allocated to a particular use at this time, which is actually allocated to social services.
Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, at this time, the conversation is the hopes to be focused on how we want to solicit input, how do we want to solicit those organizations that want to receive some of those allocated $10 million at this point. And so there's been discussion back and forth whether we're going to do an application process or not. And so really the conversation is at that point and willing to hear what the governing body's desire is on that process.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I'll just comment on that. I mean, our previous discussion had been a somewhat process of sending something down to policy and finance to come up with an application, bring that back to the governing body to then have a major discussion about the parameters, social services. In this case, we'd have that conversation, sort of what Councilmember Hiller said earlier, clarify it's social services versus businesses or what lesser also. So, I mean, my thought would be we send that down, ask the policy and finance to come up with that application, bring it back to the council to have the parameters discussion, and then sort of go from there. And that gives us a process.
Before we get into further discussions on this item, just taking a head count here, I'd like to be able to break us for about 10 minutes. We've been here for about an hour and a half now, so that way we can take a quick break and then come back for this discussion. Okay? So we'll be going into a 10-minute recess.
If in part, we can write a letter and say, we think this is really important to impact, so that there's another vote.
Mayor, we're back.
Supporting childcare.
Hey, Mayor, we're on.
Okay. Thank you.
Somebody watching the clock, I guess.
Well, I had Gretchen do it, and she gave me the heads up.
Good job.
Between Gretchen and Brenda, I don't know. Okay, thank you for staying with us. We're going to continue our discussion. And as a reminder, we're going to talk right now about the recommendations with regards to the application process. Am I correct?
That is the next action item, yes.
Okay. So we can start some discussion with regards to that and give some direction to staff. I think they already have, the city manager's not in the room, but Mr. Wade have basically a template already in place, or do you have one yet for an application process? Or Deputy Mayor, do you, or have you been involved?
Yeah, I don't know where it went, but it's fine. But he had mentioned to me before he left that there are several different templates, I think often used by the Social Service Grants Committee, that they would provide to policy to start with as our conversation. So we do have some templates. We don't have to start from scratch and go off of some of what work's already been done previously and is used. I think that was his suggestion, which sounded good to me. So.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, I know that, as the Deputy Mayor said, that you already have a starting point, I guess, with regards to application process that we can initiate, and then I'd like to move further down the road on another conversation about the Spark dollars.
Yeah, we have 3 sample applications that, we can pass around. Everybody can look at them. Recommendation is Policy and Finance Committee would be the one that, and having conversation with Councilwoman Hiller, there's also the application process for the Spark, which is pretty simple, that as a fourth option. So Policy and Finance Committee can definitely look at those. But we can pass these around if you'd like to have those, and you can move on down the conversation.
What's the wishes of the body for those present here? Would you like to see those copies? Okay. I think if you'll present it to us, what you think is the most complete that gathers the information that we've all talked about with regards to other fundings and so forth. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I guess my thing, not trying to shirk looking at something, but if we're going to send it to Policy and Finance, I guess I'd just suggest that maybe those be sent to them to look over. Yeah, I guess I'd make that motion to send this to Policy and Finance Committee for them to go through this. Well, send it to you guys and bring us a recommendation.
You have a motion on the floor?
I would second.
The second by Deputy Mayor. Brenda, where you're ready, would you call the roll?
I think Councilman Lesser.
Oh, I'm sorry for discussion. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would. I was just going to say I would like to support that too. I mean, I guess you can hand them out, all three of them, but we get too many cooks in the kitchen and too much going on at the beginning. I think the committee needs to look at it, and then the rest of us can give our input from there. That was the only comment I was going to make, instead of them getting bombarded by questions from everybody. That was my only point. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Councilwoman Hiller.
I think that's a good idea as well. The only thing I'd point out, having managed the social service grants and then having looked at this Spark one, which I really like the way the state has laid this process out. But I do think, given the conversation, it would be important, if none of those models have this, to ask the applicants what other sources of funds are available for their proposal and whether they've applied for them. And I say that because I think that's a good idea for our process, but B, I'd like that to be public now that we're going to be looking at that, so that people don't just wait for the city, but instead really are affirmatively looking for other sources and going after them. And I do hope that we would support those in whatever ways were appropriate, that we keep an eye out, and or that the applicants feel comfortable coming to us for some support. So, thank you.
Okay. Further discussion, Councilman Lesser.
Yeah, I guess the only other question I have is this committee going to meet on the same type of timetable that we would normally have committee meetings? Is it going to be expedited because of just the situation that we have at hand? Can I get a little bit of communication on how that's going to work?
So,
Deputy Mayor.
So Policy and Finance conveniently already has a meeting scheduled in 2.5 through March 1st. So that will be our first crack at that apple. And then we will set up a timeline, and I'm sure we will make sure we push it, expedite it. In other words, have more meetings frequently. So we'll set that schedule up on March 1. But the good news is we've already got one scheduled right in front of us.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Lesser.
The only other thing I would add to that, and Spencer, I'd like to get your input on this as the chair, is I think it maybe would be advantageous for you guys to report back to us the next meeting after that, versus so you can get input versus I hate it. You go and do a lot of work. We get to a point, you bring it, and then all of a sudden it gets torn up as far as this, and this, so we can kind of help you as a working document. I don't want to overstep the bounds, but I'm just trying to anticipate what I already see is going to happen anyway.
Deputy Mayor.
I would agree with that. I believe, of course, I will not speak for the other two committee members, and we'll have those discussions on March 1. But I know our goal is to keep the council looped in, and we will absolutely provide a report after that first meeting, because we don't want to do that either. We don't want to do a lot of work for a period of 2 months and then come back and you folks say, well, if you had just asked us a month ago, and then we're back wasting time and fighting amongst ourselves when we could have solved all that earlier. So yes, I agree with what you just said there. We'll make sure that happens.
Councilman Kell and then Councilwoman Nager.
My only concern is with this aspect is I don't want us to drill down so closely that we kind of almost eliminate certain things. Like I know earlier it was kind of said that, well, we're going to throw out small businesses. Well, what is a kind of almost considered a business? Because someone may consider the zoo a business or the civic theater a business, and they offer camps and other things that almost offer like a daycare throughout the summer for people, and then all of a sudden now, because of COVID, they lost money, like the Civic Theater being shut down for 9 months, I think it was. And they lost all that revenue to be able to hold those camps. Or the zoo, now being privately funded, is now that going to be a situation that, because of certain things now they can't, because of lost revenue of COVID, are they going to be able to apply for grants for their camps? So we need to make sure we're not drilling down too far to sit there and say, no, you're not eligible because you're not this or that, or you're considered a business. Because we need to look at what they're offering and what they're applying for, because I know it was kind of thrown out earlier, no small businesses.
Deputy Mayor?
So just to that point, as we've previously discussed, I think our first priority will be the application itself. And then I believe, as we've said, we will very clearly have a council-wide discussion at a meeting about those exact issues and parameters, as opposed to the policy and finance making that decision and then saying, hope you vote for it. We will try to work organically the other way, and so we will all have an opportunity to sort of develop those parameters together in a larger meeting.
Did that answer your question,
Yes, sir.
Councilman?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, Mayor.
Councilwoman Nager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would hope that in policy and finance, we would work on kind of the process, the minutia, all of those details, and making sure that we have the framework, and then we can go ahead and talk about the wider parameters and narrowing that down as a complete governing body. So that does reflect across the spectrum of our community. But yeah, do all of the fine tuning and the language and all of that sort of stuff in a smaller group where we're not all trying to get all of those details in and end up taking longer than we need to. So I think that this is a great plan.
Yeah. I would speak. Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Heller.
Just reflecting back on some timeframes that were mentioned earlier and what you're talking about now, again, realistically for expectations of social services, however they might be defined, that this is likely to be ready around June.
Oh, we can do that.
Is that what, that's different than like next month.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So that everybody understands that it's likely to happen in June, that we're going to be working on process, and that it's likely to happen no sooner, let's say, than June, to be realistic expectations for everybody?
Yeah, that's a good expectation. Yes,
Okay.
Thank you for that. For the community to know that now that we have a pot, which helps the community understand that, yes, it won't be next week, it will be this summer before we probably realistically have that lined out. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Further questions or comment? Councilwoman Ortiz, are you just scratching or do you have a comment? Okay. Anyone else? All right. I do think that's a good plan to have policy and finance take it under consideration and to make it clear that they're not predetermining anything. They're just going through that organization and bring it to the whole body for discussion at a regular council meeting. So I think that's good to make that clear to the public. Do we have?
We have a motion on the floor.
I'm going to say, could you repeat the motion and the second, please?
The motion is to defer the application forms to the Policy and Finance Committee so that they can determine the form and then bring it back to the full body with that recommendation, and then the full body will discuss details further.
Okay, motion and a second. And Brenda, if you'll call the roll call vote.
Council members Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor Padilla,
Yes.
Council members Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Acala,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Kale,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
and Duncan.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
Okay. Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. Before we get out of here, I know you talked about a grant writer that the city has now. We've talked about a lot of grants and other sources of funding. I would like to see and I hate to put the burden of another report on you, but it'd be really great if we understood what the grant writer was going after, what programs are out there, not every program, but the ones that we realistically have a opportunity with. And I don't know if that, maybe a email once a month would be great, just to understand what we're doing in terms of going after both the social service grants to help our community along with the community partners, and then infrastructure grants as they become available. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller, you and I spoke before we came back in recess. I give you this opportunity to visit a little bit about our conversations around the Spark applications.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess we did kind of get blindsided by the council did anyway, by the Spark thing and the immediate deadline, and there have been some conversations. I personally, when I got it on a Saturday night, I'm like, well, okay, I'm reading these parameters for the first time. We could be asking for a lot bigger stuff than was identified through whatever the staff process was. And I don't want us to go for something small if this is set up for us to go for something big. So I wondered if we could talk about it a little bit today in terms of, some input from the council on what to the staff to then process appropriately on what we could ask for as a city, but also it appears that we could make those proposals on behalf of the things that are important, like the child care, for instance, and so on, so that we can support and open the doors in whatever way is appropriate, but be ambitious about it. If we could spend a little time on that today, since apparently everything's due by Wednesday, so we can't very well save it for later.
Mr. Wade?
Mr. Mayor, just point of reference, the Spark applications were announced on the 28th of January, so it's caught us all by off guard. We all got caught off guard with this one, so this has been very fast turnaround.
Not wanting to be critical about it, just not wanting us to miss the opportunity, which we've all talked about quite a bit. Examples that I put a memo together just off the top of my head, but it looked like we could, child care is a complex issue, and you can't just throw money at it. There's complex reasons why people have shut down their daycare centers that have had to do with COVID and changes in work patterns and so on that I don't think we're prepared to get into, but I know that Child Care Aware is, and they represent, there's a Eastern Kansas coalition and there's a statewide coalition of child care providers that know way more than I do anyway. But because it's clear that it's so important to us, if there was a way that we could put in a recommendation or a proposal or support one of theirs, I would like to see that. Councilman Emerson got on it and got hold of 3 of our prospective folks last night and learned that I guess Child Care Aware is turning something in. So is Scent on their own because it's their project. And then due to your contact, Impact Avenues, which has been something that's been important to a lot of people that seems to be working. Again, I don't know if we need to apply on their behalf, but surely if we think that that's a good program it's got to meet the parameters that they've set in terms of being an investment that has long-term. Can't just be because we want to see something happen. So take some thought to get that done and done right. The broadband, I think I mentioned maybe just to the mayor, but if what we need is a team of navigators that can work with people in their homes to get that connectivity up, to get their stuff placed in the right place so that they're taking advantage of the Wi-Fi and so on, then I think we should pump up this is off the top of my head without that deep dive conversation, but I've been involved with that task force and talking about what the needs really are. And if if somebody else is going after making sure we've got a whole team for the next 3 years to help people make whatever hardware they have and whatever Wi-Fi they can get work, I think it's worth it for us to pump it up. There was something that went around that kind of kicked this off last week about development, and it got some economic development stuff, got a few comments, but aside from the CIP that we just voted on, I think we're all sensitive to the expenses for utilities involved in the Pope Quincy project. And so when you look at the fact that the Spark money would allow money for utility projects and also economic development, maybe something bigger, not 150 million or whatever was kind of getting kicked around without any specifics, but more like 20 million that would cover our utilities, because the state knows we're getting stuck with that. If that's a way for us to get some other assistance on that, I'd like to at least ask for it, but also bringing the county in as a partner to get the levee trails done and the economic development that could happen with that. Those could work well as a unique and attractive package, I think. I don't know if others have had more ideas, but I just hope we can go after some big stuff that really that fits their parameters.
City Manager, in talking with Councilwoman Hiller, it's understood that we're not going to go into a lot of details here into this conversation, but I do believe that if there are other councilmen, and just like Councilman Emerson, who's reached out to 2 or 3 other in his district, if there is a topic in general that any of the council members feel they would like to have addressed through a Spark application, is there capacity for staff to take that on and work through that process? If not with the whole body, at least with that individual council member, so they can see that effort is being made and meet that deadline?
Definitely.
Okay. I don't want, a flood of stuff coming in, because you still have to take care of what we've already discussed and taken care of. But I do think it gives another level of opportunity for the council members to address a topic of their concern and issue, and with you and staff, determine if it's a good fit within that Spark monies applications, and make the ask. If we don't get it, then we're no worse off. But if we do get some, I think that would be worthwhile the effort. I know that adds to your already busy workload, but again, it's an opportunity that I don't want us to miss. And I think it's encouraging too to hear the council members speak up about those particular issues and that they would like to have addressed, because I think it helps their constituents see that they're listening to them and that they're bringing these conversations to our deliberations. So if you think that capacity is there, I would appreciate, I don't know, maybe by the end of today, at least give a topic so that you have some running room, because it's due, as I understand, deadline Wednesday? 16th, 5 o'clock, or is there a?
Hopefully midnight.
Who knows? I don't know.
I would assume 6 o'clock.
Okay, well, office is closed. Mr. Wade says 5. Deputy Mayor, did you have something? No. Oh, okay. Councilwoman
I just
Hiller.
wanted to point out
Councilwoman Hiller, and then Councilman Lesser.
I just wanted to point out, maybe you guys could introduce our new grant manager is here. She's paying attention firsthand. Great.
So, Councilwoman, Mr. Mayor, if I could, and I'm going to butcher, I always butcher Kalea's last name, but I'm going to try to get it right today. This is Kalea Paoli. Close? No? Okay.
CP.
So Kalea has, this is week 2 on the job with us. She spent some time with us in January getting acclimated, but has moved in from the great state of Arizona.
Yay.
And so we're super excited to have her on board.
Well,
okay, now pronounce it. Paoli. I have the phonetic pronunciation on my desk. It's obviously not in front of me right now because I just butchered it. But so
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, if we get a chance, Mr. Wade, if you could put something out in an email to the whole body with a little more detail of who she is so that we can welcome her properly to the city of Topeka. Thank you.
This is another success of our internship program, right?
it is. Fortunately, we've got a fellowship program that we've launched, and Kalea applied for that and has just finished up her MPA degree, and we brought her on full time, and super excited to have her.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Councilman Emerson.
Oh, I'm sorry, I think Mr. Lesser.
I didn't see the hat. Councilman Lesser, go first, and then Councilman Emerson.
Well, I first would like to thank Mr. Wad for the introduction. I know English is hard. English is hard, but
Second language.
I did want to go back to one of the things that Neil had brought up. If it would be possible, I don't want anything in detail. I don't want to, beat her up all weekend of a PowerPoint or anything like that. But Mr. Mayor, you do control the agenda. I would like to see if we could add as just a short presentation, a little more introduction of the new grant writer, what she's working on, kind of her plan. I think it's the timeliness of it would be great because of obviously everything we're talking about today, and not a just kind of giving us a baseline. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm looking at, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would really be helpful, as well as us to maybe be able to ask her a few questions. I don't expect a presentation with a PowerPoint. I don't want her working all weekend, et cetera, but I think that would be helpful, unless I'm the only one that kind of has that thought at this point.
No, previously somebody, I think it was Councilman Dobler, asked for a report on the activities of the grant writer and what they've been applying for and so forth to bring us up to date. So you're concurring with his request. So it's a good idea.
Well, I'm thinking I'm asking for it to be in front of the council on this coming Tuesday, just to basically have a short presentation of, I don't necessarily need even that report at that point in time, but so we can ask her some questions. She can present what it is she's working on, her processes, how she sees that stuff. That's kind of what I'm asking. Like I said, I don't want her killing herself all weekend. That's not what I'm looking for for Tuesday.
Okay. I'll direct the city manager if you add that to our next week's agenda. Councilman Emerson, with Councilman Lesser's permission, your turn.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do wish the councilman would address the chair before he speaks.
Well, I noticed that Mr. Wad didn't do that either.
No, I agree, although I don't want to, if that keeps you, to the extent, though, that keeps you from being able to apply for some grants or something, I could wait till the following meeting, but speaking of which, I'm sure Ms. Paoli is very competent, but we've asked her to do a lot here in a few days. Will there be other people supporting her and helping her?
Absolutely not, sir.
Okay, great. That's exactly what I was wanting to hear.
Yes,
So is she.
Yes, we have a plan in place.
on her own.
Okay.
We have it under control.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I would just make, as an add-on to this, it doesn't apply to Spark funding, but I learned this week that KDOT has brought in a grant writer that they are making available to municipalities to assist with certain grants. So just to let staff know, things like Polk Quincy, for instance, and which would benefit them too, but anything that we think is federal or even state, they are willing to offer that person some assistance on those grants. So just something, they just brought that person in, so just something to key into that we might want to, they're begging for people to use them, so. Just
That actually, Deputy Mayor, is good to know, because we have a company that we have contracted with, and we've been talking to them, but having somebody from the inside with the state would probably help facilitate some of those opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, so just FYI.
Thank you. I think we have conducted all the business for this special meeting, so nothing further before this body. I close this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good information.
Yeah.